Hey guys, it's Keybros. So today we're going to react to Hong Kong singer and democracy activist Denise Ho's speech at the United Nations Human Rights Council, also known as the UNHRC.
Right, just to make it clear before we start, this is not a personal attack. We don't have anything personal against Denise, but we're simply here to scrutinize her arguments using facts and logic.
That's right. In fact, we also think that she's quite a decent singer, and we do admire her courage to speak up. Totally respect that. It's just that we disagree with some of the things she said in her speech. So hopefully you guys can also respect what we say. And as always, we welcome any types of comments, whether they're positive or negative, and feel free to disagree with whatever we say. So with that said, let's get right into the video.
Thank you. I give the floor to the United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, my name is Denise Ho, singer and democracy activist from Hong Kong. The Vienna Declaration guarantees democracy and human rights. Yet in Hong Kong today, these are under serious attack. Last month, 2 million people walked in peaceful protests, fighting an extradition bill that would remove the firewall protecting Hong Kong from interference of the Chinese government. Police shot rubber bullets and 150 tear gas bombs against unarmed protesters.
So in her speech, Denise talks about the Vienna Declaration of Human Rights. Now, first of all, we do support the declaration in the sense that human rights should be protected by all countries. But we should also note that according to Article 17 of that declaration, terrorism aimed at the destruction of human rights and freedoms should be condemned. And the international community should take necessary steps, all right, quoting from the article, to enhance cooperation to prevent and combat terrorism. Now, since Denise actually is a Canadian, we'll use the definition of terrorism provided by the Department of Justice of Canada, all right? It says, terrorism includes achieving political or ideological aims using, for example, bodily harm, death, okay, with the use of violence. Now, you can see that what's happening in Hong Kong, with people actually setting fire and throwing bricks at people from the protesters, that this could be classified as domestic terrorism. I'm not saying it's definite, but it might be, okay? And when Denise talks about the declaration in terms of it's only supporting a claim for like China is abusing human rights, she forgets to also at the same time condemn that these protesters are also actually committing acts of terrorism that should be condemned according to this declaration itself. I mean, it's pure double standard, isn't it?
Right. And also according to the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, Section 2, freedom of expression is a qualified right. It's never been an absolute right, and neither should it be, because countries should be allowed to derogate from their obligation to secure the freedom of expression for its citizens in times of national emergencies.
That's right.
For example, during the Second World War, Britain introduced certain sedition laws which prevented people from spreading Nazi propaganda.
That's right.
And I think that's a fully justified measure. And also, freedom of expression can be limited for legitimate aims, such as the protection of national security, which totally is what is happening in Hong Kong right now because our national security is at risk.
Yeah.
And secondly, by setting people on fire simply because they disagree with you, that's a hindrance to those who want to exercise their freedom of expression to express different views.
That's right. I mean, we even actually lose the freedom as, normal, innocent people to go and shop, all right, during weekends. We, back when we're like 10, we don't have to see on the map where we can't go in Hong Kong. Right now, before I go to shop, let's say on Sunday, I have to check the map whether it's actually safe and when it's actually riots going on in that area. So in that sense, many freedoms have actually been taken away by these protesters. So how can you say that it's only just China taking away your freedoms? You've also taken our freedoms away as well.
Right.
And she also mentioned about this statistic, about 2 million protesters. Now, it is worth noting that the actual statistic, according to not only the police, but also some rather actually pro-Western news outlets, have actually questioned whether it's actually 2 million. It could be just 1.5. But to give her the benefit of the doubt, we will say it's 2 million.
Right. And also Denise mentions the use of tear gas. And I just wanted to say that in all countries, including France, where you have the Yellow Vest protest going on, and America, where obviously you have the Black Lives Matter protest.
Yeah.
The police in every single country use tear gas.
Yeah.
I think it was in the last month when President Trump wanted to visit the Xinjiang Cathedral in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The police there used tear gas to disperse peaceful protesters so that he could go and have a photo op in front of the church.
That's right.
So maybe Denise also wants to condemn the United States.
What we're trying to say is that you don't have to like praise China, whatever. You can criticize China,
right?
But please also do it fairly, in the sense that putting China on the same wavelength and on the same standard as every other country. So if you condemn China, please also do so for other countries as well.
For sure.
Because that will actually be fair and also more objective. That's
totally
the whole point of our channel, really.
Point of order, I give the floor to China.
I'm asking for the floor to raise a point of order. The Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is a part of the People's Republic of China. Just now, this so-called delegate of the NGO, in her speech, mentioned Hong Kong side by side with China. This is an affront to the principle of One China and the principle of the UN Charter. I'd like to ask you, Mr. President, to urge her to use standardized UN formulation when referring to places.
I remind speakers to adhere to the well-established principles of the United Nations, including the principles of the United Nations Charter. And I give the floor back to the speaker.
So here, China's actually raised a point of order. Now remember at the very beginning of the video, the introduction, the UN Watch describes China as interrupting Denise's speech. But as you can see, it's not really true, because point of order is different from an interruption. The chairman or the vice president, all right, has to approve the point of order before China can actually speak, all right? And this definitely shows the sort of bias Western media have towards China. So we just want to point that out. It was a legitimate question. Another thing is that she talked about Hong Kong, being side by side with China. And I think every single UN country or member state has never recognized Hong Kong as a country, ever. So how can you put it, a city side by side with your country? Like, that just doesn't make sense. It obviously violates the principle not only of One China, but also the UN Charter as well.
Persons were arrested. 4 people committed suicide as an ultimate cry of despair. This anger of Hong Kong has followed years of deceitful promises. Since the handover, we saw our autonomy slowly eroded. Disqualification of 6 lawmakers, kidnappings of booksellers and activists jailed are proof of China's tightening grip.
So she talks about the autonomy of Hong Kong has been slowly eroded by China since the handover, all right? This actually implies that before the handover, we have tons of freedoms and autonomy, which is false, because we've actually debunked that in our colonial video, which you can refer to.
And also Denise talks about the disqualification of the 6 lawmakers from the Legislative Council.
That's right.
And I think we both agree that the disqualification was totally legitimate.
Yeah.
Because first of all, these candidates or these lawmakers elect, they supported Hong Kong independence, whether openly, explicitly, or implicitly. And secondly, and arguably more importantly, the reason why they got disqualified was because when they had to take an oath of loyalty to both the Hong Kong Basic Law and to our country, China, they actually replaced the phrase People's Republic of China with People's Republic of China.
Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China.
Now, to those of you who aren't as familiar with Chinese history, Jina was actually a term used by the Japanese during the Second World War, and before that, to humiliate and degrade Chinese people.
That's right.
So I totally cannot understand, and honestly, this has me kind of in a livid mood, because not only was mainland China occupied, or large parts of it were occupied by the Japanese during the Second World War. Hong Kong was in fact occupied by Japan for 3 years and 8 months. Countless of people were raped, murdered, slaughtered, you name it.
That's right.
How could you employ that term to not only degrade your fellow Chinese compatriots, but also degrade your fellow Hong Kongers? And more importantly, do you have any sense of self-respect when you use that term to degrade yourself, who is an ethnic Chinese, whether you like the Communist Party or not? You cannot deny the fact that you are an ethnic Chinese. So I think it was totally legitimate and justified to disqualify these lawmakers.
Exactly. Now, to a very contentious issue regarding the kidnapping of booksellers. Now, first of all, I want to point out that there's no sort of evidence right now that this was actually a cross, jurisdiction sort of enforcement. If that really is the case, if there's evidence, we totally condemn that because it's not right for one jurisdiction to go into another one to enforce without an extradition bill. All right, we have to do it according to the rule of law.
Right.
But we also want to point out is that the CIA, all right, has kidnapped a 12-year-old girl from Hong Kong to Libya. Okay, this is actually by The Atlantic, which is an American newspaper that spread the news. And we can link the article in the description below for your reference. So what happened was that back then, before the Arab Spring, because the US wanted to protect its own interests of oil. And when there were certain Libyan dissidents in Hong Kong, the CIA, what they did was that they shipped them onto a plane, flew the whole family to Libya, so the family could be interrogated by Gaddafi. All right? How is that actually supporting human rights?
Right.
And when you condemn China for, kidnapping of booksellers, why don't you also criticize the US CIA for doing that as well? That is precisely why we need national security legislation right at the moment, because you've got foreign powers coming into Hong Kong, kidnapping people into other countries. That's purely just double standard, isn't it?
Real universal suffrage is still non-existent. With a chief executive officer appointed and controlled by Beijing, China is preventing our democracy at all costs.
So in her speech, Denise mentions that apparently Hong Kong has a chief executive officer who is appointed and controlled by the mainland. Now, first of all, I'm not sure we have a chief executive officer. According to the basic law, we have a chief executive. But I don't think we have a CEO. I mean, Hong Kong's not a company. But secondly, you guys can refer to our last video where we talked about how the Hong Kong government is now a communist puppet.
That's right. She also mentioned about China's trying to prevent our democracy at all costs. But don't forget, actually China supported having universal suffrage in Hong Kong. It's just that the pan-democrats rejected that, and this stalled our process of becoming more democratic back to like 1997. If they really didn't want to give us democracy, they didn't have to propose two systems. They just take it back, because we were part of China before the British came and invaded us with opium. So I mean, we should be fair towards China on this sort of incident.
Mr. President, the Sino-British Joint Declaration is a binding treaty registered with the UN. Yet after only 22 years, China is denying its obligations. The one country, two systems is nearing its death. Protests are still ongoing.
Interesting, because Denise, along with other Hong Kong protesters, like to rely on the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984 as kind of a legitimizing factor in saying that Hong Kong has these sort of democratic rights that we ought to enjoy. But the fact is, when they rely on the Joint Declaration and then go on to support Hong Kong independence, it's actually rather hypocritical. Because, for example, the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has recently said that he supports the one country, two systems principle.
Respected through China's own expression of the one country, two systems approach, the UK, through successive governments, has consistently respected and supported that model, as reflected both in China's basic law and also the Joint Declaration.
So that kind of shows that even the Joint Declaration, which they like to cite all the time, and also the Basic Law, which they also like to cite all the time, both of these documents actually support one country, two systems. And it's very important to remember that one country, two systems, not simply about the differences between the Hong Kong system and the mainland system. It's also about one country and Chinese sovereignty over Hong Kong. And also a second thing, he and the British government only support lawful protests.
That's right.
Certainly they don't support rioters because Boris Johnson himself characterized rioters as thugs.
Recently.
So I feel like Hong Kong rioters should look at themselves and ask whether they really want to continue to rely on the Joint Declaration. They can't simply take parts of documents which they like and ignore other parts of documents which appear detrimental to their cause. And also, Denise has this idea that somehow one country, two systems is a dying principle.
Yeah.
I think that's totally false, because when you look at the characterization of Hong Kong by Western think tanks,
yeah,
Hong Kong actually has a very different economic and political system and judicial system from the mainland. According to the Index of Economic Freedom in 2020,
yep,
Hong Kong was actually ranked second,
yep,
while China was ranked, I think, 102nd.
Something like that, yeah.
So obviously there's a huge disparity in our economic systems. And secondly, Hong Kong's judicial integrity is admired by the whole world. World Justice Project ranked our rule of law 16th in the world in
yep,
2020. While interestingly, the US ranked 21st. So again, it's very hypocritical for the US to criticize our rule of law and our judicial independence and integrity. And they themselves have a worse judicial system. So it's quite clear from the differences in both our judicial system and our economic system
yeah,
with the mainland that one country, two systems is going strong, contrary to what Denise believes.
Will the United Nations convene an urgent session to protect the people of Hong Kong? Given its abuses, will the UN remove China from this Human Rights Council? Thank you.
So Denise urges the UNHRC to remove China. Now, if you want to remove China, you can do so, but please also remove other Western countries at the same time, because as we've said, we should be fair and objective when doing these sort of stuff. Guantanamo Bay, you've got people who suspected are terrorists being interrogated, tortured, and jailed in the prison in Cuba, by the way, it's not in the US. All right? How is that human rights? Another example, the Chagos Islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Thousands of Chagos Islanders have been forced to leave their homes because the US and the UK want to build an airspace there, all right, and they can't even go back home to this day. It's been going on for like 60 odd years. How is that supporting human rights? We're using the same standard Denise talks about.
Right.
At least the UK and the US should also be removed for the Human Rights Council, isn't it? Like you're building a military base, expelling a whole population.
Right.
That's just unjustified.
I don't understand why China can still have a seat in here where they do not respect human rights, not only in Hong Kong, but also in Tibet and Xinjiang, with the Uyghurs. So I think this is a very serious issue and a global issue that not only touches Hong Kong people, but really the global world, where you see governments, they are silencing themselves because of being afraid of political reprisal, economic reprisal.
Denise mentions the issue of Xinjiang. We have exposed ourselves to both sides of the argument in relation to the Xinjiang issue. And obviously we haven't been there, we haven't lived there.
Yeah.
I mean, so hasn't Denise.
Yeah.
So I think it would be more fair and objective and rational for us to go there and have a look for ourselves and then decide whether we agree with the Western media depiction of Xinjiang, whether we agree with the Chinese official characterization of what's going on in Xinjiang. So be sure to stay tuned, because we will be uploading travel blogs in the future.
Yes, we'll definitely go to Xinjiang. And also one thing I want to point out is that actually many countries in the world have supported China's policy of Xinjiang, and actually many of them are Muslim and Islamic countries.
Right.
You've got examples such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, which crosses the Sunni-Shia divide, by the way. You've also got countries like Comoros, Somalia, Palestine, which debatable whether it's a country, but here we go. Even the UAE, Oman, these countries have supported China's policy. Whereas for the countries that denounce China's policy, only one is Muslim, and that is Albania. So in that sense, even Islamic countries have praised China's efforts into combating terrorism. And it is quite true that before we've got like maybe hundreds, thousands of terrorist attacks in Xinjiang per year, and now it's near zero. So at least it's effective whether you like it or not. You have to give a fair depiction and try to be objective to what is happening in the region.
Right, so that concludes our video for today. If you did like our video, make sure to like and subscribe to Keybros so you can see more videos from us. And also, if you did disagree with any of our views, be sure to talk to us through the comment section, and remember to leave your thoughts below. But please, stay civilized and stay rational.
That's right. Yeah, you can feel free to share our video, and I guess that's it for today. So, Cheers guys, bye.